channel, and if you're new here, hello. My name's George Agombar and I'm a UK music producer. Today's video is all about frequencies. We're going to be having a look at the different frequencies of instruments that you'll commonly find in a mix, what we mean when we say that frequencies are overlapping and instruments are competing with each other, and then we're going to be having a look at how we can solve this problem in our mixes. So if you want to learn a bit more about this, then make sure you stay tuned and hit the subscribe button and notification bell for new videos every Wednesday.
And things will never be the same when I hear your name since you kissed me in the rain.
The frequency of a sound is the number of times a wave passes a point within a second, and this is measured in a unit that we call hertz. Now, the frequency of a sound determines the pitch. And because different instruments can play a different range of pitches, they also have differing ranges of frequencies. And that's really cool because it means that we can create mixes with both high and low end that are fairly balanced out. But it can also cause us some problems, which we'll be addressing later on in the video. Now, we also need to know that basically there are fundamental frequencies and harmonics. Really simplified, fundamental frequencies determine the pitch of a sound and harmonics determine the tone. So in this video, we're going to be concentrating on the fundamental frequencies of an instrument instead of the harmonics. So let's get into it. So these are the ranges of fundamental frequencies of instruments that you'd commonly find in a lot of mixes. A sub-bass is probably the lowest instrument. It's designed to be more felt in a mix than necessarily heard. Its frequency range is roughly between 20 to 60 Hz, so right at the low end of the human hearing spectrum. Then we have the kick drum. This is a bit higher than the sub-bass, around 40 to 100 Hz. Close to it, we have the bass guitar, which can range from 41 to 262 Hz. Next, a typical piano has a huge range of about 28 to 4.1 kHz. Another instrument with a huge range is the guitar, from 82 to 1.4 Hz. We next have the snare drum, which can range from 120 to 250 Hz. And really importantly, we have vocals, which varies with your singer, but the approximate range is from 100 to 10 kHz. And then right at the high end of the spectrum, we have the hi-hat, which can range from 3 to 5 kHz. And as you can see from this graph, lots of these instruments overlap with each other. Using lots of different instruments in a mix is brilliant. It gives us variety and adds interest to our music. However, it can be a problem when we have lots of different instruments that sit in the same sort of frequency range. And this is because that frequency range will have overlappings of sounds. They basically get overcrowded, and that's when it can really start to affect the sound of our mixes. One or two instruments in the same frequency range probably won't cause too much of a problem, but you just need to keep your eyes open and your ears open. I'm not sure that's a saying, but we're going to go with it, when these numbers start to rise. If you have lots of instruments overlapping in the low end, then you normally get a really muddy, boomy sort of sound. And in the high end, you tend to get a really tinny, shrill sort of sound, neither of which is ideal. So let's revisit the frequency graph that we saw earlier on and see where these problems are most likely to occur. Let's revisit the chart with the instrument frequencies again. As you can see, there is a lot of overlap, especially in the low end, which is why the chart looks so messy, and why our mixes sound so messy. You can see that the significant places of overlap are around 50 to 150 Hz, which is most likely causing really boomy, overpowering bass, and from 200 to 400 Hz, which is where we'll be getting a lot of body and muddiness in our mix. So these are the areas that you have to pay particular attention to when thinking about EQing and mixing your instruments. So how can we solve this? The easiest way to solve this is to assign each instrument in your mix its own little frequency range. Give each instrument its own little pocket or its own little space to work in. And the easiest way to do this is by using EQ. Here I have a track. I've got a kick drum, snare, hi-hat, vocal, sub-bass, bass guitar and piano. So let's have a go at EQing these tracks. For example, I know that a kick drum and a bass guitar overlap frequencies at the low end. So I may decide to put a high pass on my bass drum up to, say, 65 Hz, giving the kick drum its own room, its own little pocket from 40 to 65 Hz, instead of having to compete for that space with the bass guitar. I may decide that actually the vocals take precedence over the piano I've got, and so make a cut in the piano sound from 500 to 1.5 kHz, giving the vocal that little bit of freedom in the range where the body of the vocal is likely to lie. And I keep doing this for all my instruments until it starts to make a difference and my mix sounds clearer. So let's have a listen to the mix without the tracks being EQ'd and then with.
I miss you. Do you think that maybe you miss me too? And I'm like, hey, I miss you. Do you think that maybe you miss me too? And I'm like, hey.
You can hear that the mix sounded so much clearer and more balanced, and that's because the instruments are now working with each other and not against each other. However, if you listen to each instrument individually, they may not sound as good as they previously did, and that's why it's important to listen to everything in context. This may seem like a really long and confusing concept when you're starting out. I know that I certainly felt that way. The best way that I've found to deal with this is to write out all the instruments that I have in my mix, starting from the lowest playing instrument to the highest playing instrument. I then think about the frequencies that are most prominent in that instrument and what range I want to give each instrument to work in, where they'd thrive the most. I then EQ according to that plan. I don't know, there's something about having it all written down in front of you and working methodically through it that really helps me. But it might not help everyone. So that's the basis of solving this problem. Now you can use different EQing techniques such as dynamic EQ and sidechain EQing, which may work better in some situations. However, perhaps it's a discussion for another day. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it useful and interesting. Let me know what you thought in the comments below and if there are any other videos you'd like to see in the future. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and notification bell, and I will see you again soon.